Hi everyone, it's Gabrielle here. I'm excited to be back with you all again with a beautiful new kit for the Scrapbook Diaries using Vintage Remnants collection. Here I'm beginning by just cutting out a 1/4 inch off of each edge of, I believe it's called paper number 4. I always like to add a little extra interest to the page by roughing up the edges of the paper. Here I'm using the Tim Holtz Distress Tool. You can also use a scissor, just the V part of it, and just kind of run it along the edge to get the same effect. And here I'm just using my fingertips to get just a few more divots and dents into the paper. Before I attach the main layout paper to the background paper, I'm going to cut out just a little piece from the inside of the background matting paper. I use this to create a mat for my photo. I had earlier done the photo matting already, so as you can see here, it's already done, but basically you just use that extra piece to mat your photo. At this point, I'm trying to lay out where my main areas are going to be for my photo and accents. Here I'm tracing out with some pencil the area where my photo is going to be so I know where to ink. I'm using Tim Holtz Vintage Photo and I'm just dabbing it on. I like to sort of go darker towards the middle and then fade out as I do it. And here I'm figuring out where I'm going to put my accents, and I'm going to lay down a little ink there as well. As I'm looking at the page, I decide that I think it needs another extra little accent down in the bottom left corner, so I tear a little V groove, ink it with a bit more of the ink, and then I just use my fingertips to curl out the little edges. So I've decided to cut that beautiful little chipboard clock, but don't worry, I will use the extra piece later in another section above at the top of the layout. Next, I'm just trying to figure out what I'm going to do with the area behind my photo. I've got these beautiful laser cuts that come with this Vintage Remnants collection, and so I'm just kind of maneuvering around the little bits and pieces I want to use, and once I have it laid out, then I will start gluing down. But before we go on, I have a little bit more background work I want to do. Here I'm using a TCW, that's the Crafters Workshop stencil, called Mystical Trees. And I'm going to use some texture paste. It's a homemade texture paste. I'll have the recipe in the description area below the video here. I really like using this texture paste because it dries quickly, it goes on nice and crisp and clear. You can use other texture pastes and they can work as well. Just a quick side note, be sure to wash your stencils off immediately after you use them. Just take a moment to do it because you'll appreciate having a good clean stencil for your next job. So at this point I'm just taking my Aleene's glue and I'm just attaching my main layout paper to the background matting paper. So my next step is to add some texture with a little bit of cheesecloth. Here I tinted it with the ink, but I actually regret doing that. Just do it with the straight white cheesecloth because I think it shows up better against the background paper. So what I'm doing at this point is laying down my accent pieces. Here I'm darkening the center a little bit more so that my chipboard piece stands out nicely. And I'm figuring out where I'm going to put all the little bits of laser cuts that come with this kit. I'm not gluing anything down until I've decided for sure where everything's going to go. And here I'm just roughly figuring out where I'm going to put my flower accents just before I lay down too much more of the laser cuts, just so I'm not covering some of the bits and pieces that I really want to show. At this point, you can start gluing down all your laser cuts where you'd like to place them around your photos. At this point, I'm figuring out the placement for my title. It worked out well for me to put it around the outside of that chain link frame, and I was using the word captured right on my photo because there was a dark area where it stands out nicely. What I'm doing here is just using some of the leftover chipboard, and I'm placing it behind my clock design just because I want it to stand off from the page a little more, give it more of a 3D effect. So here I've realized that a lot of my chain link here gets covered by the flowers, so I decided to just snip out that piece and actually use it as an extra accent with my clock at the top of the page. Another thing I like to do is use a bit of that brown ink on the edges of my chipboard. It gives it a little bit more of a vintage aged look. So you'll see me doing that as we go along here on the different pieces of chipboard. So at this point, you just want to continue gluing down your pieces of chipboard. Here you can see I added that chain to frame that little piece of clock at the top of the page. And as you see here, I'm continuing to ink the edges of the pieces of chipboard as well. And here I'm just laying down a little bit more of the cheesecloth for a little more texture. I just put down a little bit of the glue and set it on there. You don't have to worry too much about how well it attaches, because once you put the chipboard piece over top, it really holds the whole thing together nicely. So as you can see here, sometimes the pieces I have them set in one place and end up putting them in another. I like the idea of this cog right around that little split there. So I've cut about a quarter of the cog out, and I'm just gluing it in place there. Clearly I don't like to waste. I took that extra little bit and put it up by the clock. One thing to keep in mind is when you are doing the layout yourself, you don't have to do things exactly like I've done it. You can maneuver things around to suit your photo and your page. There's one flower in this grouping that's a little lighter than the others, and so what I've done is touch the edges of it with the ink just so that it kind of blends in a little bit more with the other flower. You can lay your flowers down exactly as I have, or you can mix and match and move them around, whatever suits your layout best. Hitting the edges of your flowers with a little bit of that distress ink gives them more of a vintage look. Here I'm just tucking a bit of the cheesecloth into my flower groupings just to give it more of a tattered, pretty look. I like to layer on some of those extra cogs right over a cog grouping. It just gives it more of a nice clustered look. And I'm also adding a few here and there as accents to the page. clearly I don't like to waste any chipboard, so here I'm using up the extra little pieces. Those are the little screw heads. I'm adding them on. These little accents, they make a big difference to a page. I just love those little ferns that come in the floral collection, and I just want to take advantage and add a few of those in around my floral clusters. And finally, I want to just add a little bit more of that cyclone fence laser cut. I'm just cutting little bits and pieces and adding them in around my layout. I like to do a little bit of framing in the corners with them. And if there's, little touches here and there you can add around your photo, that's nice as well. So we're almost done. I'm just adding these pearl accents to the centers of each of the cogs. I also added a few of the tiny pearls around that clock. I think it makes it stand out a little nicer. But now we're basically done.